Hello world, my name is Leo and today we are discussing my thoughts and theories on Deltarune Chapter 2. Now, to set expectations, I want to go a bit more broad than I did with my Chapter 1 video. For that one, I had focused almost exclusively on my theories, and for this one, I'd like to devote a bit more time to my personal thoughts and feelings. So, in addition to some theory crafting, I'm going to be doing some comparisons between Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, giving my thoughts on various characters, which will kind of tie into my theories anyway, and just overall give my general impressions as someone who hasn't kept up with Deltarune until now. I also want to clarify that I will only be basing my thoughts and theories on what I've played so far. I have not looked up the sweepstakes or done any hunting for extra secrets, nothing like that. So with all of that out of the way, let's get started. And let's get my thoughts out of the way first. So far, in case it wasn't obvious, I'm really enjoying my time with Deltarune. Visuals, music, story, characters, gameplay, it's all very compelling and well done. I will say that I enjoyed Chapter 2 more than I did Chapter 1, but for now, I want to talk about specific things that I really liked across both chapters. For one, I really like the music. Not only does it match the style of the game, but I love how it enhances the storytelling through things like leitmotifs and tone. Plus, some of the pieces are just really catchy in their own right, like Fields of Hopes and Dreams and the Cyber City song. I've said it before, but I'm very much looking forward to listening to the soundtrack itself after I'm done with the game, so I can try to pick up on any motifs I've missed and see how well the songs hold their own outside of the context of the game. Second, I'm actually pretty impressed with the overall pacing of the game. Even with the gaps in between each chapter, the pacing of the story has felt very consistent throughout. It creates just enough anticipation for what's to come, while also making sure enough stuff is happening at any point in time so that the game doesn't drag on. The more joke-centered bits never outstay their welcome for the most part, and the mix of combat, puzzles, and story beats have felt very well balanced. Finally, I like how well the characters themselves are written. Each one has such a distinctive personality and voice, whether it's conveyed through font, sound, facial sprite, word choice, animations, etc. Everyone feels believable, and it makes it that much easier to get invested in these characters and their relationships with each other, the player, and the world around them. Now, with all that being said, I do believe there is a noticeable upgrade in quality between the two chapters. First off, there's the quality of life additions. The spare meter, multiple save slots, and item storage are all pretty major features that help streamline the experience in a big way, making it easier to strategize against bosses, look for secrets, and not miss out on things. All factors that are very important to the experience of Deltarune. There's also the addition of the recruitment system, which, okay, not gonna lie, right now it's feeling a bit tacked on for me. It does feel good to see the town grow and to see the different interactions of all the NPCs, but I'm really hoping that mechanic evolves in some way, or becomes more important to the plot later, because right now, it just feels kinda there. But I do appreciate it as being a tangible result of your decision to spare people. Another thing is that it feels like there's more overall creativity in the battles in Chapter 2. Granted, the battle system overall does manage to keep things fresh across both chapters, and there's a fair bit of strategy and skill involved in each encounter. However, between the roller coaster fight with Berdly, the fighting game with Queen, Spamton and Queen's boss battles, etc., Chapter 2 is just so much more memorable than Chapter 1 in terms of its battles, besides Jevil, of course. The biggest difference I felt between the chapters, though, was the sense of humor. In Chapter 1, I talked a bit about how the humor really wasn't connecting with me. I said it had felt a bit lol random coded, quote unquote, and thinking back on it, it's very hard to describe it in any other way besides that, but regardless, it just wasn't my style, and while that isn't a bad thing, it did take me out of the experience a bit. But looking back, the main problem was actually probably Lancer's specific style of humor, which did dominate the majority of the writing for Chapter 1. You know how I said that the humor never outstayed its welcome for the most part? The section with Susie and Lancer being the bad guys is the one section that I feel like dragged on just a hair too long. I feel like Chapter 2 gives itself a lot more room to breathe for its jokes, spreading them out among more characters instead of focusing too hard on one specific character. Because of that, I ended up laughing a lot more in Chapter 2, and it allowed me to connect with the game and the characters that much more. And now, speaking of characters, I want to transition closer to just like characters and analysis and stuff like that. And let's talk about Berdly. If you've been keeping up with my Let's Play, especially with Chapter 2, you know that anytime Berdly comes up, it's always something. He's a very distinctive character, to say the least, and lots of people have lots of different opinions about him. Now, I've been thinking a lot about what I want to say in this section, because I did say I would talk about him, and I think a lot of people want to hear my thoughts on him. I've said before that Berdly is very well written, and that there are complexities and nuances to his character, and I want to make sure I take that into account. However, I also don't want to talk in circles, and I really don't want to harp on points that I feel like I've already made, because my thoughts haven't really changed all that much. Even as I write this part, I keep revising it in my head, trying to figure out just how much time I actually want to spend on this. Like I said, a lot of people have different opinions on Berdly, and from what I can tell, those opinions are pretty set in stone. And at the end of the day, no matter what points I make about Berdly, it really all just comes down to opinion. Where do you draw the line when it comes to how tolerable Berdly's actions are? How understanding or forgiving are you when it comes to knowing what motivates Berdly's actions? So, with all that in mind, here's what I'll say. Some of the main complexities that I want to acknowledge regarding Berdly's character are as follows. 1. That Berdly's entire personality is an act for the most part, with him playing up his superiority and smarts for attention and validation, when in reality, he is extremely insecure and afraid of being abandoned and forgotten. 2. That Berdly doesn't have a good relationship with his parents, if he even has one at all, and that played a big role in why he is so afraid of being abandoned, and why he's so desperate to cling to feelings of validation. I didn't say anything at the time, but during Berdly's backstory, I did find it a bit odd that he didn't mention his parents at all. This is most likely why. And 3, that Berdly suffers from some kind of mental health issues that amplify his insecurities, and also make it really difficult for him to understand other people's emotions. Whether it's one specific thing or a combination of things, it does feel like his issues go beyond just simple misunderstandings, and it is important that that is acknowledged. There are other points that I could talk about besides this, but these are the main ones that I want to emphasize, and they do make Berdly's actions understandable without question. I'm also aware that he is a teenager, and people of that age are naturally going to have a harder time parsing their emotions. I also want to make it clear that I don't think Berdly is an irredeemable villain. Again, I cannot stress this enough. I get it. I get why Berdly acts the way that he does. However, just because these points make Berdly's actions understandable doesn't mean they make them justified. And to me, it really boils down to context. Berdly's actions in the light world are, to use Queen's words, just annoying. He belittles Kris, he interrupts Noelle when she's trying to speak and doesn't give her the chance to express herself. It's rude, but it's easier to brush off because he isn't really hurting anyone. In the dark world, though, the context changes, and Berdly's actions become much less okay. Now, there are lives at stake. Now, he's been given power, and he uses it for his own selfish ends. In particular, what Berdly's actions reveal is just how awful of a friend he is to Noelle, someone whose friendship he genuinely values. He physically hurts her. He continues to not listen to her and doesn't let her finish speaking. He belittles her to Kris behind her back, calling her a simpleton, while seemingly implying that he's the only one who truly understands her. Noelle at one point says to Berdly that he's nice to her when it's just the two of them, implying that he isn't nice to her around other people. And finally, just like I said in the Berdly backstory video, his plan to create a new world where he is number one and Noelle is number two, a world where he can keep her at his side forever to make sure he can keep living his ideal life, is absolutely delusional. And more importantly to this argument, I believe that particular point is indefensible. All of these actions combined crossed a line for me. Again, his actions are understandable insofar as I can understand why he does them, but that doesn't make them justified. And I think Berdly should be held accountable for his actions. He needs some kind of intervention or reality check where someone sits him down and tells him that how he treats people and how he treats Noelle in particular just isn't okay. And going off of that, I want to talk about Noelle's and Berdly's friendship as a whole, because I do think their friendship is unhealthy for the both of them. And I want to highlight something specific here as a way to start talking about that. When Berdly apologizes to Noelle for leading her on because he thought she liked him, which, by the way, it's a bit insane to me that he apologizes to her for the new world thing as an afterthought because she brought it up instead of being the main thing he apologized for, but I digress. Out of context, this moment is a funny misunderstanding, and indeed, that's basically what it's played as. But the reason I think that moment provokes such a strong reaction in people is because, combined with the context of everything else, it's essentially the biggest cherry on top of what is a massive issue with their friendship, which is that despite being friends for a long time, Berdly doesn't really know Noelle, at least that's what it feels like. He continuously, confidently says that he understands her, but in the end, it truly doesn't feel like he really knows a thing about who she is or how she feels. And I think it goes beyond just him being incapable of understanding emotions. I think that he's so confident in his assumptions he's made about her and her feelings that it's never once occurred to him to even think that he could be wrong. And because of that, he doesn't feel the need to try to understand her. I don't think that part is an act. I think he legitimately thinks that he understands her. And to an extent, it's not his fault. Noelle clearly has trouble expressing her emotions properly. Heck, she has trouble expressing herself, period. Not only that, she doesn't know how to tell people no, and she is seemingly used to people speaking for her and not listening to her, most likely because of how her mom treats her. I'm not saying that any of that is her fault, or Berdly's fault either, but in a way, Noelle does kinda unintentionally enable Berdly's behavior, and it's very easy for someone like Berdly to misunderstand someone like Noelle. I truly believe that while they do genuinely care about each other, they also bring out the worst in each other. Like I said during my Let's Play, Berdly uses Noelle to bolster his own status without building her up as well, and that isn't the kind of friend Noelle needs. Noelle needs a friend who can be her support system and encourage her, and help build her confidence so that she can stand up for herself. Unfortunately, Berdly is simply incapable of being that for her right now. Conversely, Berdly needs someone who can keep him grounded, someone who can be his friend and show him that he won't be abandoned for his flaws, but who can also give him the reality check he desperately needs. And again, unfortunately, Noelle is incapable of being that for him right now. I do think there might be someone who is capable of fulfilling both of those roles, but we'll get to that later. But right now, that's all I want to say on Berdly and Noelle. Again, Berdly is far from being irredeemable, and again, his actions are understandable, but I do think it is important to acknowledge, at least based on opinion and where people draw their lines, where my line is and how I think that Berdly crossed it through the combination of his actions. And at the end of the day, what Berdly and Noelle both need are just different friends who can give them both what they need to become better people, to become better versions of themselves. So let's go ahead and leave that be now, and let's transition to talking about some other characters. And here's where I'd like to get into some of my theory crafting. So to do some setup, in my Chapter 1 video, I mainly explored Deltarune through the lens of how it explores the themes and philosophies of choice. I talked about how agency and inevitability both seem to be crucial parts of the storytelling, and I used that to try to predict where the story would go. Here in Chapter 2, the themes in that regard feel largely the same, which makes sense, so right now, I don't feel like there's much more I can talk about on that front. It also doesn't help that it very much feels like the game is still laying the groundwork to set things up and establish the rules of the world, and is therefore still keeping its cards very close to its chest. However, there were quite a few moments, mostly having to do with various characters, that I found particularly interesting, and through that lens, I think Deltarune does manage to hint at another aspect of the theme of choice that I've yet to talk about. Now, I'm going to warn you guys up front, some of the stuff that I've come up with feels kinda out there, and there's a chance I'm way off base with all of it, but it's such an interesting angle from which to look at this game that I have to talk about it. So, to get there, the first character that I want to talk about is Spamton, a character that I know a lot of people had said that they wanted to hear my thoughts on. Spamton is a fascinating enigma of a character. Everything from his dialogue, to his quest and boss fight, to the information we learn about his past, feels like it's shrouded in mystery. I've thought a lot about what to say about his character, but the truth is, I don't really know what to make of a lot of the things that were presented. He brings up someone named Mike. I have no idea who that is. He had a phone call, seemingly with the Roaring Knight, that changed his life until the knight apparently abandoned him, causing him to fall into ruin. I have no idea why the knight would have contacted Spamton first. We do know that Spamton is aware of the existence of souls and the outside world, and that he wants to cut his strings and get to heaven. This tells us that, like Jevil, he is almost certainly aware of the game that he is trapped in, and that the heaven he wants to reach is most likely the real world. Now, when I got to thinking about all of this, despite all the questions I had about his past and his character, a new question arose in my mind. How were his past and his character even able to happen? Now, this might be a consequence of me not properly understanding the rules of the world, so like I said, I could be entirely off base about all this, but just bear with me. When Queen is giving her monologue about the Roaring Night before her boss fight, she says that, quote, "Today, it being the night, deigned to create this world," unquote. So, according to her, this cyber world has only existed for less than a day because the night created the world today. She doesn't say the night opened the way or created a portal or connected our worlds. She says it created this world today. She even says that the night plunged its knife into the world and made, truly making it feel like an act of creation. However, every single character interaction throughout the rest of the game suggests otherwise. The sellers throughout town, when talking about Spamton, all talk about how they would visit the bar every day, and how Spamton would talk over and over again about how he would make it big. Then they say that he does make it big for a time before the night abandons him. This not only implies that this world has existed long before it was supposedly created, but that the night was also able to contact and influence the cyber world before creating it. And to step outside of Spamton to expand on this further, Queen and the King talk to each other as if they already know each other and have interacted in the past, and yet this shouldn't be possible since each is incompatible with the other's world, and it's not even clear if their worlds are connected or if they even existed at the same time. The way I see it, there are two explanations for this. Either one, time between the light world and dark world works differently in a way that has yet to be explained or that I'm not understanding, or two, none of these past events that the dark world characters are referencing actually happened. Spamton never visited those bars. He never received that call from the night. Queen never met the King. They all have memories of those things happening, and those events are real for them. But in the end, I believe it's possible that the entire history of the Dark World was manufactured at the same time as the world itself. And now, going back to Spamton, what if he found that out? What if, as a part of his manufactured memories, he was given a call that awakened him to his meta-reality, and along with it, the realization that all of his memories and experiences, the things that help make him the person he is today, were put there by someone else. If that were the case, then no wonder he would want to cut his strings and be free. Everything that he's ever known is a lie. His history is part of what's making up his strings to begin with. And that's the angle I want to explore more within the context of choice. Because if that can be true for Spamton and for the Dark World as a whole, why can't it be true for the Light World as well? At the beginning of the game, the mysterious person tells the player that no one can choose who they are in this world. When you first hear that, naturally you think of lack of agency, or a lack of influence your choices have. But looking back at that quote under this new lens, I think it's worth looking at how one's history and the life circumstances that you have no control or agency over affect your identity. Two perfect examples of this, ironically enough, are Berdly and Noelle. Both are entirely beholden to the trauma of their respective pasts. Berdly with how he felt alone and abandoned, including by his parents, and Noelle with how her mom treats her, her dad getting sick, and whatever it was that happened with her sister Des. Those experiences and circumstances have played a huge role in shaping who they are today, and that isn't something that they have very much control over. Furthermore, I don't think it's inaccurate to say that their respective histories are something that ties both of them down. Just like with Spamton, history acts as the strings that neither of them can escape from. But what if that's the point? I mean, if we go full meta commentary with this, the entire world of Deltarune is a game with manufactured memories that are real to everyone who has them, but it doesn't change the fact that none of it actually happened. What if that is canon to this world? And what if the same person who creates the histories for these dark worlds has influence over the histories of the light world as well? This could explain why Spamton still had strings when he became Spamton Neo. That machine body was the product of a lightener, and the light world is just as full of strings as the dark world, if not more so. So with all that in mind, let's talk a bit about Kris. I speculated at the end of the chapter that Kris could be the knight, and I'm still thinking that could be correct, even if I still don't know if they created the first world or not. In fact, with this new context of manufacturing memories and with the dark worlds kind of being like a story within a story, I feel like that's more in line with my different theory that Gerson Boom or someone related to him could be the knight since he was a storyteller. But I'm getting sidetracked. I want to talk about Kris. Something else that I was wondering about after the chapter ended was, what's Kris's game here? Why do they keep the soul, aka us, around when they clearly despise us? Why create a fountain in the middle of their living room where Susie and Toriel would get caught inside? What is Kris hoping to achieve in the dark world? Well, there are a number of possible answers for these questions. For why they keep us around, it could be for protection, since we provide the means to fight back against the monsters of the dark world. It could be because Kris can't function properly without us, since their movements seem more jerky and uncoordinated when we aren't around. But we also know that Kris is just as desperate to break their strings as Spamton was, which has to mean that Kris might, to some degree, be aware that all of their memories are manufactured. Again, assuming that is correct. It's also very strongly implied that a soul is needed for anyone to break their strings. So it seems that Kris recognizes that they need us, at least for the time being, to accomplish their goals. As for why they would slash the tires to manipulate Toriel into making sure that Susie stays over, and why they would create a fountain right then and there with Toriel in the blast radius, if Kris thinks their memories are manufactured, then it could be just the sheer desperation, but it could also be that they just don't care as much about the world anymore. I mean, if the whole world and everyone in it is based in manufactured history, who's to say if anything is really real? And at that point, what do your relationships with the people around you even mean anymore? It's a scary line of thinking, one that has the potential to drive people mad. And with Kris doing something as drastic as this, who knows if they're really in their right mind anymore? But there is one more thing I want to talk about. One more factor that could be playing a role in all of this. One that could explain why Kris needs us as their soul, and why they're seemingly acting with very little emotion. Where is Kris's soul? We know that all Lighteners have a soul. We also know that Kris sees us as a foreign object. So, did we take control of Kris's soul? Or did we replace it? Or was it already missing? Was Kris's body already empty when we were put inside it? If it's either of the last two options, that could explain why they need us, and it could also be a factor in their mental and emotional state, since the soul is also extremely tied to a person's sense of self. So, again, where is Kris's soul? And you know what? For no reason in particular, let's talk about Ralsei, shall we? So, Ralsei, much like Spamton, has a lot of mystery around him. And after the events of this chapter in particular, I began wondering, what exactly is Ralsei? I mean, all of the other denizens of that dark world are inanimate objects in the light world, and yet Ralsei doesn't seem to operate by the same rules as the others. So, what do we know about Ralsei? Well, we know that he's in some way royalty. He has some kind of standing above the other Darkners. However, he doesn't act like he's above them. On the contrary, he acts very meek and innocent most of the time. He's obsessed with doing the right thing, even to a fault, and always thinks of others before himself. He also has the ability to act for himself, but chooses to follow Kris's orders instead, even going so far as to apologize when Susie makes him dance on his own during the Sweet Captain Cakes battle. He's supposedly been waiting a long time for Kris to come to the Dark World, and he seems aware of us being inside Kris, since I do think that him suggesting that we imagine what Susie is up to is a ploy to manipulate us into leaving so that he can relay information to Kris without us hearing. We know he is having some kind of identity crisis, as he tells Kris during the boat ride that he doesn't know what being Ralsei-like even means. And finally, he's able to traverse the different Dark Worlds without any incompatibility issues, which has to mean that he isn't tied to one specific location in the Light World. This one in particular is an interesting one, because it could mean that Ralsei is instead tied to a specific person. And since Ralsei takes on the form of Azrael, it would make sense that that person could be Kris. So, when it comes to what object Ralsei could be, we're looking for something that is tied to Kris as a person, and who would want to follow their orders, something that is associated with innocence, kindness, and a good moral compass, something that wouldn't have a clear identity of its own, something that could have some kind of importance above the objects/darkners, and something that would be aware that Kris's body has been taken over by a different soul. And you know what's very convenient for this line of thinking? The fact that in this world, the soul is an object that can act independently and can be interacted with. You all could probably guess where I was going with this already, but I believe it's possible that Ralsei could be Kris's soul, who was somehow discarded or went missing in the Dark World, and who, through the influence of that world, was able to take on its own form and identity. Now, this very much feels like a theory that others in the community would have already had and shared in other places, so I'm sure people will already have opinions on this. I don't know if this has been debunked already. I don't know how ridiculous this theory is compared to other ones out there, but based on the information we have, it seems at least plausible to me. This theory can even tie back into the manufactured history theory, because just like with everyone else, Ralsei's identity has been affected by his past, and if he's aware of us, who's to say he wouldn't have also had a meta-awakening like Kris? Even further than that, who's to say that Kris's soul going missing along with Ralsei's creation was all manufactured, and that Ralsei could be aware of that? And if all of that is true, what's Ralsei's true motivations here? The truth is, I don't know, and going any further than this would feel like going more into conspiracy territory than I already am, but either way, it's truly a fascinating line of thinking, and even if I turn out to be wrong, I'm glad to have explored it here. There is one more character that I'd like to touch on before I end the video, and that's Susie. Because of all the other characters, Susie feels most like the linchpin or catalyst for what could come next. Despite clearly having some kind of past that affects her reputation and behavior, she feels like the one who is the least held back by her strings. On the contrary, it seems like she fully embraces her strings and makes them her own in a way that the other characters just can't. From what we've seen so far, she lives her life the way she wants to, free to do as she pleases. And it might be because of that everyone is drawn to her. Remember how I said that there was someone who could potentially fulfill the role of the friend that both Berdly and Noelle need? Susie could be that for them. I could absolutely see her being able to support Noelle and help her stand up for herself, which we kind of already see with Queen, and I could also see her being a loyal friend to Berdly, while being capable of giving him a reality check if he needs to be made aware of how his behavior affects others. Kris is also drawn to the idea of being free of their strings, and we already know they have a thing for purple dragon ladies, so it makes complete sense why they would gravitate towards someone like Susie. And as for Ralsei, it almost feels like he and Susie are foils of each other, so different, yet being able to be friends despite that. I know that the Susie harem is a joke I've seen brought up a few times, but there are legitimate reasons why she would be able to draw these characters in. She embodies a lot of qualities that they either want or need in their lives, a strong sense of identity, freedom, and character. She also is one of the only characters who can actively resist us without even knowing she's doing it. I don't really know what any of this means for the plot, and only time and the other chapters will tell what kinds of strings Susie is being affected by, but I felt like this was important to talk about because based on all of this, I can absolutely see Susie playing a pivotal role in what's to come, and could even be the deciding factor in who ends up with agency in the end. And those are my theories. Like I said, I could be entirely wrong about everything, and the reason why I want to hammer that point home repeatedly is because even to me, the one saying these theories out loud, they kind of feel like they're out there and far-fetched, at least partially. Talking about all of this, I can't help but picture that conspiracy board meme with everything connected and it all sounding entirely ridiculous, but with the info I currently have, I think they make some sense. In particular, I do like how the manufactured history and memories theory ties into the themes of agency in relation to identity. Feel free to let me know what you thought about all of this in the comments below. Again, please, goes without saying, but please try not to spoil anything about future chapters. But I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say on anything that I have said. Not gonna lie, this video was not an easy one to write. Trying to talk about these different topics in a way that didn't sound entirely unfocused and rambly was a challenge, but overall, I think this came out okay, and I'm glad I was able to get everything out there that I wanted to say. Thank you everybody so much for checking this one out. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing, ring the bell, liking the video, all that good stuff. Discord, Ko-Fi, and Blue Sky are in the description below if any of those interest you. Discord has a chill community where we sometimes play games. Ko-Fi, every little bit helps me towards my goal of being able to do this channel full time, but there's no pressure to do that. Being here and watching is support enough. Plenty support enough. And Blue Sky, not gonna lie, hardly post on it, but I'm there. And yeah, thanks again so much for watching, and I will see you guys for whatever Chapter 3 has in store for us. Goodbye!